Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Friends of the Dar, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. Tonight, Dar al-Athar al-Islamiyyah is honored to present an archaeologist and art historian who has done extensive field work in China. Dr. Diane Zhang Goldberg is an associate researcher from the East Asian Civilization Research Center in Paris, as well as a lecturer in Chinese art history and Asian art history, again, all in Paris. Since completing her PhD, she has focused on her special interest in the Tangut people, another Silk Road people who are, until current research and discoveries, less well known. Tonight, she will present a lecture based on her postdoctoral studies on the Tangut people. Her lecture is entitled Nomadic Traditions, Foreign Influences, and Dynamic Ambitions on the Silk Road, the Tangut Idiosyncrasies in Light of its Funerary Culture. Very long title. The Tangut, who settled in the northwest part of the Chinese Empire in the 17th century, developed the Tangut Empire, which existed from 1038 to 1227. Of particular interest to tonight's presentation in the Tangut Imperial Cemetery, Dr. Zhang Goldberg will discuss the information on the funerary architecture of the Tangut, which reveal the originality and creativity of this culture, as well as how they related to other surrounding people. Current research on the Tangut people, including the Tangut Imperial Cemetery, have not revealed, with all efforts, have not revealed any mobile phones. They tried. It is possible that they were looted or destroyed by the armies of Genghis Khan. So, we're talking about burial, so make sure you bury your telephone in your pocket after you put it on silent. And let's welcome Dr. Goldberg.
Your Excellency, dear friends, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. I'm very honored to be here tonight to do this lecture. First of all, I would like to express my gratitude to Sheikh Hassan Sabah for this invitation and for giving me the opportunity to participate in this 28th cultural season. And I'd like, of course, to thank all the organizers from the Dar al-Athar al-Islamiyyah and also the National Council for Culture, Art, and Literature. Now we are going to talk about the Tangut people. Before starting, I'd like to do some explanation regarding the names because these people has several names according to who called them. So they called themselves the Minya. But then foreigners, starting with the Mongols, started calling them the Tangut. And the Tangut is actually the term used today by foreign scholars, and it's commonly used. And in China, Chinese researchers and scholars would call these people the Xixia. They founded a state. We will see this later. So they called their state the Great Kingdom of the White and Lofty. But in China, Chinese scholars would call them the Xia or Xixia. So the Minya was nomad people of the Silk Road. The existence, we are going to talk about this region, which is situated in the Ningxia region in China. So the existence of the Minya, or Tangut, is mentioned in Chinese historical record as far back as the Tang Dynasty. According to the old book of Tang, the Tangut were a nomadic people of herders who moved along the pastures of this present day is Sichuan, Qinghai, Gansu, and Ningxia. So they were dwelling in this region outside of the borders of the Chinese Empire of that time. During the Sui dynasty, they made an alliance with another people called the Tuyuhun, and this gave them the strength to launch incursions into the Chinese Empire. They managed to expand their territory before accepting Tang rules in 631. As a result, Tangut tribal chief Tuoba Cichi was appointed prefect of 5 counties in present-day Shanxi and given the surname Li, which was the surname of the Chinese emperor of the Tang Dynasty. In the middle of the Tang Dynasty, they were feeling pressure from the Tibetans who were advancing and trying to expand their territory. So Tuoba Cici asked the Tang emperor for the right to move his people within Chinese borders. This is how they settled permanently around Yinchuan. And in 1038, they declared an autonomous state, the Great Kingdom of the White and Lofty, whose capital was the present day of Yinchuan, present-day city of Yinchuan, here. And the empire would expand from here. This autonomous political entity is sometimes called an empire, sometimes a state, sometimes a kingdom in Western and Eastern academic literature. There are various explanations and justifications for these different names. As early as 986, Li Jiqian, the Minya ruler, was already called king of the Xia state by the Khitang of the Liao dynasty after he married to a Khitang princess, according to the history of Song. His son Yuan Hao then gave himself a title which can be translated as Heavenly Lord, and proclaimed the birth of an empire in 1032. In Minya texts, the official name of the state can be translated as the Great Kingdom of the White and Lofty, according to the work of Xixia Keping from the Institute of Oriental Studies in St. Petersburg. However, the Chinese of the Song dynasty will call it the Xia state and use the word sovereign and not emperor to refer to Yuan Hao. In later Chinese dynastic histories, the history of Liao and the history of Jin, this state would be designated as Western Xia, Xixia in Chinese, and the choice of the term by the neighboring peoples is significant. By creating their own state with an emperor, the Minya claimed to be equal to the Chinese and the Khitang Empire, while the Chinese and the Khitangs were careful not to use the term empire for this new state. I will be using the term empire and emperor because this is how the Minya rulers considered their state and themselves. So, for almost 2 centuries, this new empire underwent considerable economic, territorial, and cultural development. Irrigation techniques made it possible to cultivate the land in this quite inhospitable region. According to the old history of the 5 dynasties, livestock farming became a field of excellence. Tangut horses gained quite reputation and were sold at a premium across the region. The Tangut army, retaining the cavalry practices typical for nomadic people and adopting the weapons developed by the Chinese, conquered new territories, pushing the borders as far as Dunhuang to the west and Lanzhou to the south. Last but not least, this empire was continuously crossed by routes used by travelers of various origins, merchants, caravaneers, monks, nomads, pilgrims, who engaged in numerous commercial, cultural, and spiritual activities. So this is the Tangut Empire, and it was crossed by routes going from Xi'an in China all the way to Central Asia and the Middle East, and then sometimes to Europe. This is a map of all the trade routes, maritime and land roads, that were used to do trades between the Far East and the Far West. So this strategic position enabled the Tangut to control the trade between the Chinese Empire and Central Asia, and sometimes as far as Europe, as well as trade between Mongolia, Gansu, Qinghai, and Tibet. The presence of these routes, commonly referred to as Silk Road, enabled the Tangut Empire to benefit from intense commercial activity and ongoing cultural exchanges. This mix of extremely heterogeneous populations and cultures was to be decisive in the birth and development of a genuine Tangut idiosyncrasy. However, building and consolidating an empire was not the only objective of the Tangut rulers. As a cultural symbol, they invented their own complex script, which they used to draft their laws, their official documents, but also to translate Buddhist texts. Their mastery of printing techniques contributed to the spread of written work. Here you have an example of the Tangut script. At first, some would say it looks like the Chinese writing, but if you see the comparison here, you will see it's much more complicated with a lot of strokes, sometimes up to 20 strokes. So it's a language which is quite difficult to learn and to memorize. So the Tangut became fervent Buddhist from the earliest day of the empire, thanks to the impetus given by the imperial family. The Tangut elite never ceased to demonstrate its devotion by financing the construction of monasteries and pagodas and commissioning the translation of numerous Buddhist texts. The artistic output that resulted from the devotion gave rise to a style that is still very much in evidence today. Examples include the Tangut wall paintings in the caves of Mogao and Yulin in Gansu province. The paintings discovered by a Russian mission in 1917 in Karakoto, and also demonstrated by the architectural art of the Ningxia region. In 1227, the Mongol army of Genghis Khan, after repeated offensives, finally decimated Tangut people and systematically destroyed its cultural heritage. In a short space of time, the Minya civilization fell into oblivion, and the Tangut script became indecipherable. As for later Chinese historical documents, they recount the history of the Song, Liao, or Jin, but there is no history of the Xixia. In these dynastic histories, the Minya are only mentioned in a chapter devoted to foreign countries and people. This oversight obviously added to the mystery surrounding this Silk Road Empire until the discovery of the Liangzhou stele unearthed in Wuwei in Gansu, and bearing a bilingual inscription in Chinese and Tangut script. This gave birth to Tangut studies in the 19th century, and the later archaeology brought new elements to better understand the Tangut, in particular their imperial cemetery. Now we are going to explore some striking features of Tangut funerary architecture and art. So the Tangut Imperial Cemetery, known as the Xixia Imperial Cemetery in China, lies at the foot of the Helan Mountain. This is the Helan Mountain, west to the city of Yinchuan. It's a vast area of 50 square kilometers, and it contains 9 imperial tombs belonging to Tangut Empress, and there are more than 200 accompanying tombs, secondary tombs. These tombs seem to be inspired by an archetype. Each imperial tomb is enclosed with an enclosure like a funerary park, like a city. This main enclosure, for example, has 4 entrances that resemble the gates of a city. And an outer enclosure sometimes come to encompass the entire complex, either wholly or in part. For example, here we don't have an external enclosure, but the corners of virtual enclosure is marked by towers, corner towers. For other tombs, you have a complete outside enclosure or a half-closed enclosure like this. So they are quite different, except tomb number 1 and number 2, which are identical. Each imperial tomb comprises several types of constructions and several enclosures, and there are a lot of different buildings with different purposes. To the very south of this complex, we can see towers at the south entrance placed on either part of the gate. They are called the Chuetai towers. They are placed symmetrically on either side of the median axis. To the north, we have what we call the stele towers, pavilions, because they house the steles with inscriptions on them. These pavilions are built either in pair or in 3, like number 1, 2, 3. There are some bases decorated with a relief of a primitive kneeling figure that we will see later, which have been discovered along with numerous fragments of stone stele. A small enclosure that we can call the secondary enclosure is located immediately to the north of these pavilions and to the south of the main enclosure. So the main enclosure is either square or rectangular in shape, and it's much larger than the secondary enclosure and has 4 openings as well on each side of the walls. And these gates are all flanked by very massive gate towers. Corner towers were, of course, built as well at the corners of the main enclosure. As you enter the main enclosure, slightly to the west of the median axis, you will find a ceremonial hall, which looks like this, and it is right here. To the north of this ceremonial hall, there's a long rounded mound just going from here to the funerary monument. And this mound actually marks on the surface the access ramp, which is underground and which lead to the burial chamber. Then a funerary monument stands in the northwestern part of the main enclosure, slightly to the north of the elongated mound. Even in ruins, the internal structure is still often 20 meters high. It resembles a tall pyramid with rounded contours and octagonal plan, with the exception of tomb number 3, which has a circular plan. It has several levels that we can still perceive, and the burial chamber is generally located underground, 10 meters in front of the funerary monument. So the monument is here. The Tangut's decision to build monument as distinctive as a burial mound reflects a number of influences and desires. They are clearly architectural borrowing from China with knowledge of the Chinese architectural treatises, construction techniques, and the current styles. We will see these influences later. There are religious imperatives derived from Buddhism, developed on Tangut territory by traveling monks with considerable work on translating the Buddhist canons using versions in Chinese, Tibetan, Uyghur, Sanskrit, and probably also Khitan. This is very probably a form of exchange with the Khitan with whom they had developed close links from the 10th century forward. Although this use of the octagonal shape in the funeral context may also be a simultaneous architectural revolution by the Tangut and the Khitan at a time when the imperial family and the aristocracy of both empires accorded Buddhism the highest level of devotion, because in Buddhism, the octagonal shape is very commonly found for pagodas, for instance, and the Khitan would use this shape inside their tomb. In some cases, the buildings are surrounded by an outer wall, which also have towers, like the corner towers. However, although the two northern towers are located at the northwest and northeast corners of the enclosure, the two southern corners are located on the east and west wall at the level of the secondary enclosure, which is here. This is very unusual. Instead of being at the corners, they are situated at this level. They are not in the true sense of the word corner towers. Furthermore, when there is no outer enclosure, the corner towers are nevertheless present outside the main enclosure, delimiting the perimeters of the tomb. For tomb number 1 and 2, there is a small building in the center, like this, here. But those tombs are the only ones with these small buildings. This initial general impression led many specialists to assert that these tombs were built according to a model borrowed from the Chinese. But a detailed study of imperial cemeteries in China allowed me to challenge this assertion. It is true that certain features of the Tangut imperial tombs are reminiscent of Song imperial funerary architectures, such as their orientation, north-south, the city-shaped layout, the presence of a tumulus, and certain constructions such as the gate and corner towers. However, the layout and plan of Song tombs were standardized. The same model was applied for each emperor. Here we have an example of the tomb of the Chinese Song Emperor Taizong. So we have a tumulus, which is situated exactly in the center of an enclosure with the gate towers, corner towers, an alley leading to this tomb, and they are commonly found, this layout is commonly found. This is obviously not the case with Tangut imperial tombs, whose architecture is much more varied. The layout of the Sun tombs also appears simpler. The absence of an outer enclosure contributes to this impression. Moreover, Tangut deliberately break with the principle of symmetry, which is at the heart of the Song architectural design. And here we have an example of the funerary monument of the Song Emperor Zhenzong. And it is a square-shaped tumulus with several levels. It looks like a pyramid, which was cut at the top. What all imperial tombs have in common is this very original octagonal funerary monument that rises near the burial chamber, breaking with the Chinese model of the tumulus, because in China, a tumulus from the Tang to the Song dynasties used to be either natural, like a small hill, or artificial, like the pyramid-shaped tumulus. This one is a much more sophisticated building because the Tangut Emperor used a lot of decorative elements to decorate this building, which made it look like a pagoda with a solid earthen body and multiple floors, with eaves decorated with ornaments and covered in tiles. I have suggested it should be called a funerary pagoda. Another striking difference with Song imperial architecture I have underlined and studied is the presence of various unusual shifts, orientation, location, and numerous breaks in symmetry. The relative layout of the buildings, but also the differentiation between buildings, even when they are arranged in pairs. The location of the funerary monument, built in the northwest quadrant of the enclosure, introduces a highly unusual asymmetry into the plan, compared with the traditional layout of tombs in China, where the most important building has to be in the center of the enclosure. This feature can be also noted at the Miningcun Cemetery, which is a Tangut aristocratic cemetery nearby, and this cemetery was built slightly before the birth of the empire and was used all the way through the birth of the empire. There, the tumulus is in the shape of the thick pancake, which has nothing to see with the Tangut Imperial Tombs monument, but it is also located in the northwest quadrant of the enclosure, not in the center. This use of asymmetry can be observed on several occasions in the architectural organization of the tombs. On the surface, for example, Tangut Imperial tombs may have 3 stele pavilions instead of 2. They could put 2 or 4, but they put 3. Below ground, we can observe as well a shift. The only imperial tomb which was excavated showed that the chamber, the burial chambers, the 3 chambers, were not located directly under the funerary monument, but 10 meters to the south. This is very unusual. Usually you would find the chambers right below the tumulus or the funerary monument. These discrepancies are difficult to interpret. The fact that they are also found underground in a place hidden by viewers show that their primary purpose was not aesthetic, but symbolic. This will lead us to the core of the Tangut idiosyncrasy. So, in that regard, we may first consider the burial method. Cremation was a traditional Tangut funeral practice. It was also advocated by Buddhists, of course. As a matter of fact, cremation is the predominant burial method in Tangut tombs. However, emperors seemed to have opted for burial. The choice is even more surprising, given that by erecting a funerary pagoda in place of a tumulus or a burial mound, the Tangut sovereigns wanted to demonstrate in some way their profound attachment to Buddhism. To explain this paradox, I drew the hypothesis that this choice can be explained by the eminently political purpose of the imperial cemetery. The practice of burial among Chinese emperors made it the imperial way, funeral method par excellence, a model to be followed. And the Tangut were in quest for legitimacy because it's such a new state with new dynastic ambitions. The Tangut sovereigns decided to follow it despite their ancestral practices and Buddhist beliefs. The interpretation also led me to a second hypothesis, which would explain one of the discrepancies mentioned earlier. insofar as the sovereign's body was buried, the funerary pagoda could not fulfill the function of a reliquary. In other words, it could not be erected on top of the burial chambers because the bodies underneath are not cremated, but buried. So this discrepancy embodied the unresolved contradiction between the imperial injunctions and the dual Tangut and Buddhist traditions. The funeral pagoda's unique style and layout would then be the result of this heterogeneous demand. The presence of animals in tombs is a second feature to reflect upon. Archaeological evidence showed that Tangut aristocrats, keeping their pre-imperial traditions, were keen to have animals in their tombs. But probably out of respect for Buddhist practices, the Tangut Code of Law, written later after the foundation of the empire, by this same aristocrat, formally forbade animal sacrifices. So the result was a tension between traditional aspirations and legal obligations. Some people, both at Miningcun and at the imperial cemetery, seem to have substituted symbolic representations for the actual presence of animals. But others, in both the cemetery, clearly infringed the new norm, either by sacrificing animals or at least by being buried with their animals in their company. As far as we know, the Tanguts did not manage to find a satisfactory solution to this contradiction between Tangut heritage and imperial law. This also led to the development of animal themes in Tangut funerary art, with the use of a wide variety of materials, wood, stone, iron, bronze, as well as the development of a lot of different motifs, bulls, sheep, horses, dogs, etc. Decorative motifs, in particular roof ornaments or stone monsters used as stele bases, are also striking evidence of Tangut idiosyncrasy. In the Xixia cemetery, there are several types of zoomorphic roof ornaments. These unusual celestial or hybrid creatures, often glazed, stand out because of their size. Sometimes they are up to 1.5 meters high. The originality of their shape and the technical difficulty involved in making them show the attention given by the tomb owners to make them so sophisticated and monumental. Despite of the lack of sources, analysis of this ornament suggests that the Tangut had incorporated Chinese roof decoration motifs into their funerary architecture, and no doubt also into the decorations of their palaces and the monasteries. This seems to confirm how familiar they were with Chinese architecture and very probably with the Chinese architectural treatise, the Yingzao Fashi. But here, again, Chinese influence does not mean that the Tanguts were simple imitators. The liveliness and sophistications of the models unearthed, as well as their quantity, highlight the Tangut's inventiveness and originality and the great deal of resources and artistic work they put into them. So these are roof decorations found at the Xixia imperial tombs. And in paintings found in Karakoto, which is a former Tangut fortress, we can see decorations which look almost exactly like the ones we found. And in these Chinese stone paintings, we can see roof edge decorations, which are clearly very look like those decorations. And these are explained in the architectural treatise. And the Tangut has access, certainly to the treaties, and also to workers and architects coming from China working in Tanggut territory. So it wasn't difficult to make decorations like this, but their own decorations are big, sometimes very slightly different. Another feature worth mentioning is the role and the unique appearance of the stele bearers. On the one hand, they seem to be inspired by yaksha bearers, but they diverge enough to evoke maybe ancestral Minya people creatures. On the other hand, their function is the same as that of the Chinese still carrying turtles. But because they're demons from age-old traditions rather than mere animals, their posture and role come to illustrate how ancient beliefs can be domesticated, placed at the service of a new order, that of Buddhism and the Tanggut dynasty. This is a typical Tanggut interweaving, not only between endogenous and exogenous traditions, but rather between different strata of time and symbolism that the Tangguts were striving to reconcile. So now let's have a closer look at the tomb, Imperial Tomb number 3. And I would like to share an interpretation of this tomb by studying some original features, which suggest that Tanggut idiosyncrasy, this could be a process which was individual, but also collective, and this is an example of individuality demonstrated in the Imperial Cemetery. The most obvious singularity of tomb number 3 is the presence of hybrid creatures with the head and bust of a man and the body of a bird. And these stand out from the group of zoomorphic decoration. Not only they were only discovered on the site of Imperial Tomb number 3, but the large number of statuettes is also very surprising. So far, more than 80 have been reconstructed from fragments, which means there were many, many more, and they could be found everywhere in this tomb, near every building. Iconographic and comparative research have shown that these statuettes have numerous points in common with the art of Dunhuang, as well as Tang and Song Buddhist art, with Liao and Sogdian funerary art and Song architectural art, but also with Indian art and the Tanggut art of Karakoto. Various elements, representations of these birds, called the Kalavinkas at Dunhuang, seem to confirm that the creatures in the imperial cemeteries are indeed Kalavinkas, which are mythical birds represented in the Pure Land of Amitabha. They are closely associated with the Pure Land, where devotees of Buddha Amitabha can achieve rebirth after death. The Kalavinka in Buddhist text is a mythical bird with a melodious voice reminiscent of the voice of Buddha. The Kalavinka, either in bird form or in hybrid form, are usually shown dwelling in beautiful renderings of Pure Land like this one. Buddhism, particularly that of Amitabha, undoubtedly profoundly modified Tanggut conceptions of death, and hence the function attributed to tombs. Indeed, it is striking that in Miningtsun, for example, where Tanggut nobility was not yet deeply attached to the new religion, tombs are in no ways presented as a gateway to another world. It's only a final place, resting place. This observation demonstrates once again the extent to which the Tangguts rapidly and profoundly modified their funerary practices during the imperial period, gradually developing a new funerary art, particularly embodied in the dynastic tombs. In that regard, the massive use of kalavinkas in tomb number 3 may have aimed at representing, here below, in the eyes of the deceased and the survivors, the marvelous world to which he wished to have access after his death. This is another example of kalavinkas in the paintings of Yulin, which is near Dunhuang, and we can see this creature which looks quite similar to the statuette in the Tangut cemetery. And sometimes they're represented playing musical instruments. Moreover, the massive and unique presence of the Kalavinka motif, which seems to be the result of a personal preference, adds to a series of intriguing elements about this tomb. For example, it's the only tomb, imperial tomb, whose funerary pagoda has a circular rather than octagonal shape. It's also the only tomb that does not have a ceremonial hall with a rectangular base. The base is octagonal this time and supports a circular building. In the current state of excavation, it is the only imperial tomb whose stelae have inscriptions only in Tangut. Other tombs have inscriptions in Chinese and Tangut. These features clearly suggest that meticulous choices made either by the deceased or his entourage govern the design of the burial site in order to express personal desires or evoke the personality of the occupant. I believe that the owner of the tomb is at the origin of these choices, as they are so striking and concern highly symbolic elements. They clearly intend to stand out from the established model and result in the creation of a unique specimen that breaks away from the other tombs. The first layer of specificities, architectural choices, may embody aesthetic or metaphysical preference. This is difficult to analyze. The second layer is religious, reflecting the belief and aspirations of the deceased. The third seems to stem from a political stance. The exclusive use of the Tangut script symbolizes a way to break away from Chinese influence, an attempt to assert fully autonomous dynastic identity. Tomb number 3 thus reveals the personality of an occupant with precise aesthetic intuitions, who used them to satisfy his religious or artistic aspirations. An occupant who was attached to Tangut traditions, but did not hesitate to innovate or seek originality. Finally, it was a person who was proud to be a Tangut, sufficiently convinced of the power and the durability of his empire, of its rightful place in the geopolitical landscape, to break with the imperial script by excellence, which was of the Chinese by that time. And this is why I've suggested that this tomb should be labeled a portrait tomb, as it expresses the personal aspirations, beliefs, and taste of the deceased. Therefore, contrary to the Chinese researchers who have repeated that the Xixia Imperial Cemetery is a copy of the Song Dynastic Cemetery, at most we can assume that the Tangut, like the Song, borrowed elements common to the Chinese Tangut funerary architecture. But the Minya should not be considered a peripheral people, since a close analysis of Tangut funerary culture suggests that the Minya did not break with their traditions, their customs and beliefs, and built up their own standards. They were inspired by China, of course, but they never allowed themselves to be culturally subjugated or by the Chinese Empire or any other surrounding peoples. The invention of their own script at the dawn of the imperial era exemplifies this concern. Buddhism, which was quickly established as the state religion, did not eradicate traditional beliefs and practices either. On the contrary, particularly in funerary culture, because of its major symbolic nature, Tanguts always tried to intertwine external influences and political ambitions with Minya nomadic traditions, even sometimes with personal convictions. Thank you very much. If you want to know more about the Tangut funerary culture, my book is going to be launched next year in March. So you have all the details here if you want to know more about the Tangut people. Thank you for listening.